Most people think charisma is about what you say. They are wrong. Real charisma, the kind that makes people get addicted to your presence and question their own sanity, is about how you make their nervous system feel. Today I'm going to show you why your greatest asset isn't your resume, but your ability to become an unforgettable social drug. Most people spend their entire lives auditioning for a lead role in rooms where they don't even own a seat. They talk too much, they try too hard, and they wonder why, despite all their effort, they remain invisible. But there is a specific type of posture, a way of looking, a way of observing that allows you to dominate the environment and take ownership of the territory without any visible effort. For some, this appears to be a gift. It happens naturally across all levels of society. But for everyone else, it's something that must be understood, perceived, and practiced. And that is where the shift happens. The before and after of this breakthrough can change the way you connect and determine exactly which doors will open for you and which will stay locked. If you've ever wondered why certain people effortlessly open doors that remain shut for everyone else, the answer isn't in their credentials. It's in a psychological trigger they are pulling that you aren't even aware of. What is interesting is not that these individuals exist. What is interesting is how people describe the experience of being around them. Almost universally, the description has nothing to do with the magnetic person at all. People do not say, "He was so impressive." They do not say, "She was so funny, so eloquent, so commanding." What people say when they reach for the honest answer is something closer to, "I felt more like myself around them. I felt smarter. I felt like what I was saying actually mattered. I left that conversation feeling better about my own life." Think about that for a moment. The most memorable social presence in the room and the primary experience people walk away with is not about that person. It is about themselves. The conventional understanding of charisma is built almost entirely around performance. If you search for advice on becoming more magnetic, more socially compelling, more attractive to others, you will find a remarkably consistent set of recommendations. Make strong eye contact, use open body language, speak with confidence and vary your vocal tone, tell good stories, project energy, enter a room and take up space. Be the kind of person who initiates, who leads, who draws others in through the sheer force of their personality. This framework is not wrong exactly. There is a version of social presence that operates through projection, and it works after a fashion.
A person who walks into a room with genuine confidence, who speaks clearly and moves without apology, who tells an interesting story well, that person will be noticed. They will make an impression. The belief underneath all of this advice is intuitive and feels correct. To be compelling to other people, you need to be a compelling person. You need to have something worth projecting. You need to develop your personality the way you might develop a skill, building it deliberately until it becomes something others are drawn to. This belief has produced an entire industry. Books, courses, frameworks, and coaches all oriented around the same fundamental premise, that charisma is a thing you build inside yourself and then express outward into the world. The more refined the expression, the stronger the impression. The stronger the impression, the more people are drawn to you. The gap between how you think you show up and how you actually show up, according to this framework, is a performance gap. Close that gap, and you close the distance between yourself and the version of you that others find irresistible. There is a reason this belief is so widespread. It is partially true. Presence matters. Confidence is real. Delivery changes how people receive ideas. None of that is false. But this framework misidentifies the mechanism entirely. It locates the source of social magnetism in the wrong place. And because of that, it produces a very specific and quietly painful outcome. People who do everything right and still feel like they are not quite connecting. People who project all the right signals and walk away from interactions wondering why the room never really leaned toward them. People who are technically impressive and entirely forgettable. The missing piece is not about what you project, it is about what you create in others, and those are not the same thing at all. And this is where things become interesting. The psychological pattern that separates genuinely addictive social presence from its imitation is not found in what people do when they are talking. It is found in what they do when they are listening. More precisely, it is found in the quality of attention they bring into an interaction and how rare that quality has become. Consider what a typical conversation actually feels like from the inside. Someone is speaking to you. Somewhere between the first and second sentence they say, your brain has already begun generating a response. You are not fully absorbing what they are saying. You're preparing. You are constructing your next contribution, retrieving a relevant story, formulating the point you want to make. The conversation becomes a series of turns rather than a genuine exchange. You are present in the technical sense. You are in the room, you are nodding, you are making the right sounds, but your attention has already moved on to what you are about to say. This is not a personal failing, it is the cognitive default. And because it is the default for almost everyone, something very specific happens when you encounter someone who breaks the pattern. Think about a person who has spent 12 years building a consulting business. Smart, experienced, good at what she does. She goes to an industry dinner one evening and ends up seated with someone she has never met, a man who has built a larger firm in the same space. She expects the interaction to follow a familiar rhythm: mutual positioning, subtle professional comparison, the polite exchange of credentials that passes for conversation at these events. Instead, he asks her one question about a challenge she is working through, and then he listens. Not the performance of listening, not the nods and the murmurs and the waiting for his turn. He actually listens. He asks a follow-up question that could only have come from absorbing what she said, and then another. 20 minutes later, she has told him things she has not told her closest colleagues. She drives home that evening not thinking about him. She is thinking about herself, about the clarity she found, about the ideas that surfaced during the conversation, about the version of her professional thinking she had never quite articulated before. She does not think, that was an impressive man. She thinks, I need to talk to him again. That is the mechanism. That is what creates social addiction. Research into conversational dynamics has consistently found that the experience of being genuinely listened to activates a different quality of thinking in the person speaking. When we sense that our words are landing, that they are being absorbed rather than waded through, we think better. We access ideas we do not normally reach. We feel more articulate, more interesting, more intelligent. We feel, in the precise sense of the word, more alive. And here is the crucial part. The brain is an attribution machine. It does not carefully separate the cause of an experience from the person present during it. When you feel more alive in someone's presence, your brain does not say, the quality of that person's attention temporarily elevated my cognitive and emotional state. Your brain says, something about this person makes me better, and it wants to return to that feeling. This is not metaphorical. This is the neurological basis of social addiction. Certain presences become associated with elevated states of self-experience. And the brain, which is fundamentally a pattern completion system oriented toward reward, begins to seek those presences out. The people who generate this effect are not doing it accidentally. Most people never realize this, but if you study them closely, you find the same behavior operating consistently beneath the surface. They ask questions that require real answers. They follow threads rather than redirecting conversations toward themselves. They create the experience of being the only person in the room, not through drama or performance, but through the simple and increasingly rare act of full, unhurried attention. In a world where the average person checks their phone once every 6 minutes, where most conversations are conducted in a state of partial distraction, where even well-meaning people are mostly waiting for their turn, genuine attention has become neurologically scarce. And scarcity, in the economics of human attention, produces exactly the same effect it produces everywhere else. It produces craving. Most people never realize this, but the addiction people develop to certain social presences follows the same neurological architecture as other forms of reward-seeking behavior. This is not a loose analogy. The mechanisms are structurally similar. When researchers at University College London studied the brain activity associated with social validation,
specifically the experience of feeling genuinely understood by another person. They found activation patterns in the ventral striatum in the medial prefrontal cortex. These are the same regions activated by other reward stimuli. The brain does not have a separate system for social pleasure. Social reward runs through the same circuitry as every other form of it. And like other rewards, repeated exposure creates reinforced pathways. The brain learns to want the experience again. But there is a second mechanism operating beneath this one, and it has to do with identity. Most people walk through their daily social lives in a state of mild self-compression. They are performing some version of themselves, the professional version, the appropriate version, the version that fits the context, the version that is unlikely to be judged or dismissed. They are managing their presentation, and because they are managing their presentation, they are slightly less themselves than they could be. This is so normal, so constant, that most people have stopped noticing it. The compression is the baseline. Now imagine encountering someone in whose presence that compression lifts.
Someone whose attention is so genuinely focused on you, not on managing how you perceive them, not on positioning themselves, not on waiting for their turn, that you begin to drop the management. You say what you actually think. You follow ideas without editing them. You become more precisely yourself. This is what behavioral psychologists call identity mirroring at the interpersonal level. When one person is genuinely present without agenda, the other person's self-concept temporarily expands. They access a version of themselves they rarely inhabit, more fluent, more direct, more honest. Studies on self-concept clarity from research groups at the University of Waterloo found that people consistently rate their social interactions as higher quality when they report feeling able to express their genuine self during them. Not when the other person was impressive, not when the other person was engaging in the conventional sense, when they themselves felt more fully present. The addictive person, then, is not addictive because of anything intrinsic to them. They're addictive because of what they activate in others. They carry a kind of social permission, an invisible signal that says, in this conversation, you do not need to perform. You can simply be. And that signal, for most people, is so unusual, so rare in daily life, that it produces something close to relief, the kind of relief that feels like comfort, the kind of comfort the brain encodes as belonging. Think about a person who has worked at the same company for several years, technically competent, well-regarded, unremarkable in social terms. There is one colleague he gravitates toward without quite understanding why. Not the most senior person, not the most charismatic in any obvious sense, but every conversation with her leaves him thinking more clearly. His ideas seem better when he talks them through with her. His confidence in his own reasoning is higher after their interactions than before. He does not think about what she does. He just knows he wants to talk to her when something is difficult. He books time in her calendar the way other people book time with their therapist or their most trusted advisor. And she has done nothing except give him the experience of his own thinking at its best. That is the full mechanism. The person who creates social addiction is not the one who is most impressive to be around. It is the one who makes you feel most capable of being yourself. The experience becomes associated with them. The brain wants to return. And what reads from the outside as magnetic personal charisma is, at its root, the effect of one person consistently creating space for another person to be more fully alive. Pay close attention to what happens next in any high-functioning social environment. Watch for the person everyone seems to gravitate toward when something is complex or uncertain. Watch what they actually do in conversation. They're almost always doing less than the people around them. Less talking, less performing, less positioning. And they are doing one thing more consistently than anyone else. They're paying attention. Full, unhurried, undefended attention. And the people around them are responding to that attention the way a plant responds to light. Turning toward it, growing in its direction, coming back for more. This pattern manifests differently depending on the environment, but the underlying mechanism does not change. In professional settings, the most socially powerful people are often not the ones with the most authority. They're the ones others trust most instinctively, and that trust is built not through competence alone, but through the consistent experience of being genuinely heard. A manager who listens more carefully than they speak will generate more loyalty from their team than a manager who is technically superior in every measurable way. Not because listening is a nice quality to have, because being listened to is one of the few experiences in professional life that makes people feel that they matter, and the person associated with that experience becomes indispensable. In social situations, the contrast is even more visible. Most people arrive at a dinner, a party, an event with their social mode already activated, broadcasting. They have stories ready, opinions queued, jokes loaded. They're prepared to contribute. And contributions are noticed, sometimes appreciated, often politely endured. The person who does something different, who arrives in a state of genuine receptivity, who asks a question and actually follows where the answer leads, who is more interested in understanding than in being understood, that person stands out not through force, but through contrast. The contrast matters enormously because presence is always relative to its environment. In a room full of people competing to be the most interesting, the person who is most interested will always win. Not because interest is a strategy. It is not a strategy. It is a state. But the effect of that state in a competitive social environment is profound. People leave conversations with that person feeling something they cannot quite name, something they want to feel again. There's a second dynamic worth examining here, and it concerns what psychologists sometimes call emotional availability, the degree to which a person's attention is free versus occupied. Most people's attention is occupied. They're managing their image, calculating responses, comparing themselves to others in the room, monitoring how they're coming across.
These are not shallow concerns. They are the natural output of a social brain trying to navigate status, belonging, and safety simultaneously. But they consume bandwidth, and the consumption is visible even when people cannot articulate what they're seeing. We can sense when someone is only partially with us. We feel the residue of their internal processing, the slight lag, the response that does not quite fit what we said, the sense that our words landed in a room that was already full. When you encounter someone whose internal room is genuinely clear, someone who is not running a parallel process of self-management while talking to you, the difference is physical. Your nervous system registers it before your mind does. The conversation feels different, safer, more spacious, more interesting than conversations usually feel. Pay close attention to what happens next. That feeling of spaciousness, of safety, of being in a conversation where there is genuinely room for you. People do not analyze it. They simply return to it. They associate it with the person who created it, and over time, that association becomes a gravitational pull. This is also why authenticity functions as a social amplifier. Not authenticity as vulnerability performance, not the calculated sharing of weaknesses as a technique for building rapport. Authenticity in the simpler, more precise sense, the absence of an agenda. When a person has no agenda in a conversation, no position they need to win, no version of themselves they need to protect, the other person's nervous system detects this within seconds. The signal is, this space is safe. And in a social environment where most interactions carry an invisible weight of mutual management, that signal is extraordinarily rare. Imagine two people both asking the same question at a networking event. One is asking because it is a useful opener, a way to establish connection before moving toward what they actually want. The other is asking because they genuinely want to know. The question is identical, the words are the same, but the person being asked can feel the difference. Not always consciously, but they can feel it. And one of those interactions will leave a residue of warmth and trust. The other will not. The most socially addictive people are not running a better version of the same social strategy everyone else is running. They are operating from a fundamentally different internal orientation. They are genuinely more interested in others than in being interesting. And that difference, which costs nothing and requires no technique, produces social effects that no technique can replicate. This is the part that most people get completely wrong. When people encounter the ideas in this video, the primacy of attention, the power of genuine curiosity, the neurological mechanism behind social addiction, they make a specific error. They try to convert these ideas into techniques. They decide to ask more questions. They practice listening with intention. They remind themselves to focus on the other person. And within 3 conversations, they are back to where they started. Because none of this is a technique. A technique is something you execute from the outside. What we're describing is something that either exists on the inside or does not. The gap between technique and genuine presence is one that other people feel with immediate precision. So the question is not, what should I do differently in my next conversation? The question is, what do I need to understand differently about what conversations are for? The first shift is this. The goal of a conversation is not to be interesting. The goal is to be interested. These sound similar. They are almost opposite. When the goal is to be interesting, the conversation is a performance with an audience. You are producing something. You are managing how it lands. Your attention is on your own output. When the goal is to be interested, the conversation is an exploration with a partner. You are not producing anything, you are discovering something. Your attention is on what is actually happening in front of you. People who are oriented toward being interesting can be entertaining, impressive, even genuinely charming in the short term, but they do not produce the specific effect we have been examining, the effect where someone leaves a conversation feeling better about themselves than when they arrived. That effect requires your attention to be elsewhere, on them. The second shift concerns what attention actually costs. There is a widespread assumption that attention is finite, that giving it to someone else depletes you in some way, that you are somehow diminished by being more interested in another person's experience than your own. This assumption is not just incorrect, it is precisely backwards. The people who give the most genuine attention in social situations are consistently those who report the highest levels of social energy. They are not drained by connection, they are fueled by it. Because genuine curiosity about other people is one of the few social states that produces more than it consumes. The third shift is the one most people resist. Charisma without authenticity is not weak charisma. It is the opposite of charisma. This is a precise distinction, and it matters. A person can be smooth, engaging, skilled at social performance, good at making people feel briefly appreciated, and create nothing that lasts. No loyalty, no pull, no reason for anyone to return.
Because the experience they create does not belong to the other person. It belongs to the performance, and people sense the performance even when they enjoy it. What people crave and almost never find is not someone impressive. It is someone in whose presence they feel that they are real, that what they think matters, that the version of themselves showing up right now is enough, that there is no audience to perform for, no judgment to manage against, no version of themselves they need to construct. When you remove the performance, not as a strategy, not as a technique, but because you have genuinely stopped needing the other person to think well of you, something releases in the interaction. The other person feels it. They relax. They become more themselves. And the state they are now in, more alive, more articulate, more genuinely present, becomes associated with you. That is the architecture of social addiction, and it begins not with what you do in conversation, but with why you are having it. Once you understand this, many things start to make sense. Think about the people in your own life who you find yourself drawn back to, not the ones who impressed you most, the ones you actually want to see again, the ones you reach for when something is difficult, or when something is good and you want to share it, or when you are working through a problem and you need a particular quality of space to think. What do those people actually do when you are with them? If you examine it honestly, the answer is probably not what you would have predicted before this conversation. They are probably not the most accomplished people you know. They are probably not the most eloquent or the most entertaining or the ones with the most interesting lives. What they do, the thing that makes them irreplaceable, is probably simpler and harder than any of that. They pay attention. They follow what you actually say, rather than where they wanted the conversation to go. They ask questions that could only have come from someone who absorbed your previous answer. They create an experience of being known, of being seen at something close to full resolution. And in that experience, you become a better version of yourself,
more articulate, more honest, more clear about what you actually think. The conversation draws something out of you that does not emerge elsewhere. And somewhere in the middle of it, though you would never say it this way, you feel more real than you usually do. This is the thing that most people spend their social lives trying to create in others through performance, and most of them will spend their entire lives working toward it from exactly the wrong direction.
The most unforgettable people you have ever known were not focused on being unforgettable. They were focused on you. And the paradox, quiet, precise, and entirely reliable, is that the less interested they were in being remembered, the more completely they were. Think about what that means for the energy most people bring to their social lives, the preparation, the positioning, the management of impression. Think about what it would mean to set all of that down, not as a technique, not as a strategy for becoming more charismatic, simply because you have understood, finally and completely, that the most powerful social force available to you is not what you project. It is the quality of your attention to what is already there. We began with a person who defies easy explanation. They are not the most accomplished in the room, not the loudest, not the most polished or the most visibly impressive, and yet people return to them. People find reasons to be near them. People leave their presence feeling more capable, more clear, more alive, and associate all of that with absolute neurological fidelity with the person who was present when it happened. Now you know what that person understands. They understand that human beings are not, at the deepest level, seeking someone to admire. They are seeking someone in whose presence they can be themselves without cost. The experience of being fully seen, of having your thinking taken seriously, your presence registered without judgment, your actual self welcomed rather than tolerated, is so rare in daily life that most people encounter it only a handful of times. And every single time they encounter it, the brain records the coordinates. It builds a map back to that feeling. It wants to return. This is what the performance-based model of charisma will never produce. You can project confidence, and people will respect you. You can tell great stories, and people will enjoy you. You can command a room, and people will notice you. But none of that creates the specific hunger that brings someone back to you again and again, not for what you offer, but for who they become when you are near. The people who generate that hunger are not more gifted than the people around them. They are more honest about what a conversation is. It is not a transaction. It is not a stage. It is a moment in which two people can, if one of them is willing to hold the space without agenda, become more fully themselves than they manage to be almost anywhere else. That willingness costs nothing. It requires no skill to perform, because it is not a performance. It requires only one thing, a genuine shift in what you are there for. Not to be seen, to see. Most people will spend their entire social lives trying to become more interesting. They will refine the signal they send into the world, sharpen the edges, increase the wattage, broadcast more clearly. And they will wonder quietly why the people they most want to stay never quite do. The answer was never in the signal. It was always in the reception. And what people are addicted to when they are addicted to a person, not just a performance, is the experience of being received completely, of walking into a conversation and feeling without explanation that there is room for all of them, not just the polished version, not just the version that is easy to manage, all of them. That is what the most magnetic people in any room have always understood, not as a theory, as a way of being present. The question is not whether you can learn it. The question is whether you are willing to stop performing long enough to find out what happens when you do. If this way of thinking about people is useful to you, there's more of it here. Subscribe, and I will keep going.